Well, hello and good evening, and welcome to Toronto Apologetics. My name is Tony Costa, and I'll be hosting, as I usually do, the program tonight. And just want to welcome all of you, wherever you are on planet Earth. Welcome along. And we want to encourage you to like the video. We also want to encourage you to subscribe to Toronto Apologetics. It is completely free. And as you know from our past episodes, we always have various speakers on dealing with various topics that challenge the Christian faith, and we're here to challenge those ideas that question historic Christian theology, and we're here to provide answers to those objections. And so tonight, I'm very pleased and happy to have one of my favorite apologists in terms of outreach to Islam, a dear friend whom I've known for many, many years, and many of you have known as well. And I want to bring on my good friend, Dr. David Wood, also known as the Dizzle. David, thanks for coming on tonight, and it's so good to see you.
Hey, how you doing, Tony?
I'm doing well. Thank you for coming on. This is, I believe, my first time having you on my YouTube channel, which is still relatively young and green. So thanks again, David. So,
yeah, you've been on my channel a ton of times, but
yeah, and that's what really inspired me to start my own. So I really appreciate that, David.
You got a good setup here. Good luck for your channel. You did catch me for this at a horrible time, because I just got banned for a week. I usually get out of these once they, people complain and stuff, but
yeah,
I can't even tell people on YouTube that I'm over here with you, because you're not allowed to post anything, even like share this to the community platform. So
right.
Yeah, but I'll share it later.
Sure. And I know YouTube's been pretty nasty with you.
Yeah.
They haven't been very nice, and I know you've got a Twitter account where you call out their inconsistencies and accusing you of putting violent material out when it's actually satire and comedy.
And the bans are pretty much always like their bots are catching something, and then they don't realize that it's us responding to something, right? Like if you were to make a video responding to some white supremacist or something like that, and you played a clip of some white supremacist and said, look what this loser said, the bot will pick up on, hey, this is that known white supremacist that we've been programmed to find clips of, and therefore take your video down. And the problem is when you tell them, hey, I'm not talking about white supremacy and so on, but I'm talking about jihad and ISIS and things like that. They're picking up on clips. Sometimes I guess it could just be targeted and people are complaining about stuff, but usually it seems to be stuff where we've got clips of something that bots are picking up on, and then the reviewers are just too lazy to actually take it seriously. So anyway, that's the situation.
Yeah, well, thanks for bringing that up, David. I know you're doing a good job of exposing a lot of the hypocrisy that goes on there. But tonight we're going to be discussing a topic related to Islam, and we want to talk tonight about Muhammad and his sexual proclivities, his various sexual preferences and so forth. And this is an issue that is very sensitive to a lot of Muslims, especially those in the West, because they have a picture of Muhammad as this great moral character, and he's the best pattern of conduct that Allah tells us that we should follow, and that he is the perfect human being that should be emulated. So David, maybe we can talk a little bit about maybe starting with Muhammad's first wife, Khadija. We hear about her almost tangentially, but can you maybe start with that? Because a lot of Muslims will bring up the fact that she was older than Muhammad, and that everything was pretty well romantic and hunky dory there.
Yeah, and you definitely hit the nail on the head there when you pointed out that these are sensitive issues for Muslims, when it's very strange because the Muslim sources blab about this stuff all the time, right? I mean, the early Muslims were blabbing about Muhammad having the sexual strength of 30 men, and saying that he would have sex with 9 women and girls in a single night, and that he was constantly covered in semen and all this gross stuff. And if you tell a Muslim that today, they go, "Oh, how dare you? You Islamophobe, you bigot!" When, guys, why are you ashamed of it? The early Muslim community, they weren't ashamed of it. They kept talking about it all the time. And so a lot of times when we bring up something like Muhammad and Aisha, which we'll talk about here pretty soon, you got Muhammad and Aisha. So Muhammad married a girl named Aisha, who was 6 or 7 years old, had sex with her. He consummated the marriage, according to all of their major sources, when she was 9 years old. And he would have been 54 years old at the time. So a 54-year-old man, old enough to be at least her grandfather, had sex with a 9-year-old girl. And according to the sources, she was actually prepubescent. So that's a problem. But when we bring that sort of thing up, a lot of Muslims will say, well, he can't be a pedophile because he had other wives, and his first wife was Khadijah, who's 15 years older than him. So how can he be a pedophile when his first wife was 15 years older than him? Now the obvious response, I think, that they're missing is you're saying, hey, no, he must have had pure intentions with Aisha, because he clearly has pure intentions if he's marrying this much older, very wealthy widow. I don't know about you, Tony, but when I hear about someone marrying a much older, very wealthy widow, I'm not thinking, oh, he must have pure intentions.
Right.
That's not what I'm thinking, especially if you grew up and you don't have a lot because you're an orphan like Muhammad was. I'm thinking maybe you're trying to get some money there.
Sure.
But so that's one thing. But actually, I think there's something more psychologically problematic at work here, because Muhammad didn't just marry some rich older woman. He married a woman who would have been about the same age that his mother was. And if you read the sources, it sounds disturbing, right? I'll just give people a little background here. I've talked in videos about psychological issues that arise, and it's primarily with children who lose their father figures when they're young. If they either have a horrible, abusive, violent father figure, or if they have no father figure at all, that affects them when they get older. They tend to have a greater problems with authority. They have greater problems with father figures, and they have greater problems with viewing God as some sort of heavenly father. So I've pointed that out with Muhammad, but Muhammad lost everyone. So his father died before he was born. Then he was sent to live with a family of Bedouins. They eventually concluded that he was demon possessed and sent him back to his mother. So he lost that. That was his first family that he would have remembered. He lost them. He went back to his mother when he was about 4.5 years old. And then his mother died when he was 6. Then he was sent to live with his grandfather, and his grandfather died 2 years later. So Muhammad lost every relationship he had by the time he was 8 years old. And so you can see how this is related to Muhammad having a problem with God being a father. God's a father to no one. The only relationship you can have with Allah is a slave to master relationship. You can see how this affected all kinds of relationships. I mean, the Surah 33 of the Quran originally said that Muhammad is the father of Muslims, because it says the wives are the mothers of believers. So why isn't Muhammad the father of believers? Well, the Quran, Surah 33, verse 6, originally said that, and then it was removed. And then later in the chapter, it's revealed he's not a father of any of you.
Right.
And so there's this constant sort of daddy issues going on, but you can also have mommy issues. Like it's reported that when the Muslim community was on the move once, and they went by Muhammad's mother's grave, and they said that he was crying so much that his tears soaked his beard. So this is a grown man who'd seen all sorts of horrible things in life, and nevertheless, he's just weeping over the memory of his mother to the point where his beard is soaked. And then that's how affected he was by losing his mother at that young age. And then when he gets to a certain age, 25 years old, according to the Muslim sources, about 25, he marries Khadijah, who's about 40, about the same age that his mother would have been. But it's very interesting, like when you read about how he would, when he starts receiving his revelations and he gets scared, he thinks he's being attacked by a demon. But whenever something would scare him, he would run home to Khadijah and say, cover me, cover me. And she would have to cover him up with a blanket and hold him. And I'm thinking, a grown man is acting like this, especially like a grown man who's like the pattern of conduct from. I mean, Tony,
Yeah.
I'm sure you're like me. If some horrible, evil thing is chasing you, are you going to run home to your wife?
No.
Yeah, I'm going to stay away from my family. And
Yeah.
hey, if you want to take me out, take me out. If you want to chase
Yeah.
me, chase me. If you want to do something to me, do something to me. Stay away from my family.
Right.
Whereas, Muhammad is literally running home for protection from his much older wife. Protect
Yeah.
me from this evil demon that is coming after me. And that is so disturbing. But notice, it is exactly what a little child would do. A little child
Right.
would run home to his mommy and beg his mommy to protect him. And that's exactly what Muhammad did. So something, they apparently had a good marriage otherwise, but definitely some disturbing stuff. And I don't think Muslims can really point to that to show that Muhammad's intentions were pure. I
Yeah.
think you have some psychological
I
issues.
would
And
agree.
at the very least, he married a rich old woman.
Yeah. I mean, those are definitely deep-seated insecurities that he had in terms of his mother passing and so forth. But also, you mentioned his insecurities with father figures, and I know we mentioned this before, David. I know you did a show on that. I think it was Paul Fritz who wrote the book "Faith of the Fatherless," and in that book,
Paul Vitz.
Paul Vitz,
Mhm.
Vitz, right? Vitz, or Vitz, as you say in the United States. And in that
You
book,
guys say Zed up there?
Zed, yeah, we're part of the Commonwealth,
Okay.
so we follow the British for some reason because we're part of the Commonwealth. So we do say Zed. You guys said Z. Anyway, when I did the alphabet growing up, they taught us to say Z, but we ended up pronouncing it Zed. But anyway, Paul Vitz wrote a book called Faith of the Fatherless. So if you guys don't have that book, I would encourage you to get it. And he says pretty much what David has said, that a lot of some of the leading philosophers and leading scientists, including Richard Dawkins, had troubled relationships with their fathers, with the fathers were either absent or the fathers had betrayed the family in some way. And it can explain as well, David, that a lot of these atheists have this deep-seated hatred for the idea of God as Father, the Heavenly Father, and so forth. And it would explain why Muhammad had an aversion to calling God Father.
And it actually has, like, Muhammad is like the paradigm of this psychological this collection of psychological issues. So keep in mind, everyone, no one's saying that, if you have a bad father or missing
Yeah,
father, you're going to be an atheist, or if you have a
right.
great father, you're going to be a theist or something like that. It's just straightforward statistics, right? It's people who go through various things as children statistically end up with different sorts of issues when they get older. So Paul Vitz went through basically the life stories of over the past couple of centuries, the most prominent defenders of theism and the most prominent defenders of atheism or anti-theism, and he concluded that it was down the line. It was down the line, person by person. The most vocal anti-theists all had major problems with their dad. I mean, Madeleine Murray O'Hair tried to kill her dad. And the most prominent theists tended to have very close relationships with their father, and so it tends to affect them. But there was that interesting passage at the end of the book where he raises an objection and says, "Well, if in our time these things have such an impact on theism and atheism, and whether you believe in God, how do we explain that atheism is a pretty recent thing?" Not a lot of atheists, centuries ago. So, but people still had bad or missing fathers back then. So what was the issue? And he says there at the end that this this would have expressed itself differently in previous generations where atheism wasn't considered a live option. So he says if you go centuries ago, it would have expressed itself. It would have led people to, of course, have a problem with viewing God as a heavenly father. It would affect their ability to form long-term relationships. Again, we're not saying that you have messed up relationships. It's just statistically, it tends to, the problems in relationships tend to rise if your childhood experiences with the people who are closest to you were traumatic, or people abandon you, left you, or just died, but it feels like they abandoned you. That affects your relationships later in life. So they have problem forming healthy relationships, and they have a tendency to rebel against authority and tradition. And you look at Muhammad, he rebels against his culture to the point where he eventually comes back and violently subjugates them. I mean, he forces them to submit to him. So that's how much he rebels against the culture of his time. He says he's actually with the Jews and the Christians, except the Jews and the Christians both view God as a heavenly father. So he has to reject that. He has to reject that. No, Allah's a father to no one, not in any sense. And you look at his relationships, and it's just one really, really weird relationship after another until, we'll probably get to the issue of Muhammad and Zainab, but Muhammad had an adopted son named Zayd, and Muhammad eventually abolishes adoption. Like, you orphans, I didn't get a father. None of you gets a father. There's no more adoption in Islam, and I'm taking your wife. And it's like really, really dysfunctional.
Right. I mean, and even he was orphaned at a young age, so he never met his dad, and his uncle, according to the reports, wasn't the best relationship there. And so it does really explain that idea of the idea of God being this paternal guardian was something that obviously Muhammad would have had an aversion to. So that's with Khadija. We touched on Khadija. So let's move along then, Dave, maybe in a chronological line here. What would be the next sexual deviant behavior that Muhammad would have been involved in, according to the Islamic sources?
Well, his first two wives after that were Sauda and Aisha. There will be you'll find some people disputing which one was first, but his relationship with Sauda, she was an older woman once again, and if I had to guess, it seems like Muhammad needed someone to take care of his kids from his relationship with Khadija, and so that's what it looks like. But even the relationship with Sauda was massively dysfunctional because as he got more and more wives, he was eventually going to divorce Sauda for being old and unattractive. And keep in mind, this is the paradigm. This is the example for all Muslims. If your wife gets older and gains weight, just get rid of her and trade her in. And Sauda actually had to plead with Muhammad and forfeit some of her marital rights and privileges in order for him to keep her on, because no one was allowed to marry Muhammad's wives after him. And so she just would have been, a widow. And so she had to beg him to keep her. And the Quran actually praises her for that, for coming to that agreement, for being smart enough to forfeit some of her rights in order to come to this agreement. So that's Sauda. But far more disturbing is Muhammad marrying a 6-year-old girl who was the daughter of one of his closest companions, Abu Bakr. And Abu Bakr initially had an objection to this because they viewed themselves as so close that they viewed themselves as brothers. So when Muhammad, he gets this vision or this dream where Allah is giving him a present, and he opens up the present, and it's Aisha. So it's my 5 or 6 year old buddy's daughter. Now, Tony, if you have a friend and you have a dream about his daughter being given to you as a present, you're going to conclude, hey, God wants me to marry this girl.
Yeah, no.
I'd want to go see a psychiatrist or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you got it. Yeah, because you got some problems there that are coming out.
Yeah,
that's some Freudian stuff. If something like that happens. Anyway, so when Muhammad proposes marriage to Abu Bakr, says, "Hey, I want to marry the little girl. I want your little 6-year-old." Abu Bakr says, "But we're brothers."
Yeah,
but we're brothers. Muhammad said, "No, we're just brothers in religion. She's lawful for me." And the reason that's relevant is so many Muslims, when they try to justify Muhammad's relationship with a prepubescent little girl, they say, he did it to cement his relationship with Abu Bakr. Doesn't work like that. Abu Bakr thought they were closer. Muhammad actually had to push him away. We're not as close as you think, bud.
Yeah.
Give me your daughter.
Yeah.
And so Abu Bakr agrees. Muhammad writes the marriage contract. Now, this is kind of this is kind of disgusting, but you kind of have to say it just because there are
Hmm.
so many Muslims who say, well, since he married her at 6 and they consummated the marriage when she was 9, therefore Muhammad must have been waiting until she reached puberty. And there's nothing in the Muslim sources about Muhammad waiting till Aisha reached puberty. In fact, the Muslim sources say the exact opposite, that she hadn't reached puberty when
Right.
she was taken to Muhammad's house, and she apparently didn't reach puberty for several years to come. And we know this because once a girl reached the age of puberty, she wasn't allowed to play with dolls anymore because they were considered
Right.
images. So
Right.
puberty is considered the age of accountability. And before that, it's like, we don't care if you're playing with dolls. Once you reach puberty, now you're at the age of moral accountability, and we can't allow you to play with dolls. When Aisha was not only playing with dolls when she's taken to Muhammad's house to consummate the marriage, she was still playing with dolls years later. And so she hadn't reached puberty, according to the Muslim sources. And this is just, this is just taken for granted
Yeah.
in, Sahih al-Bukhari and so on, where they use Muhammad's relationship with Aisha as an example of marrying a prepubescent girl. And so you've got those kinds of disturbing issues. But for the Muslims who say, well, he waited until she was 9,
Mm.
so he must have been waiting for puberty. That's not what
No.
he was waiting for. There can be other issues, just like, hey, there's a lot of stuff going on, and he's moving the community from Mecca to Medina, and then they get to Medina and she gets sick and all her hair falls out. So all sorts of delay issues. But what it really looks like, what you do find in some of the commentaries and so on, is they'll talk about a girl being, I don't even know how to put it, ready to have sex without damaging her. And
Mm.
it's not puberty. And by the way, even Muhammad Hijab admits this. He says
Yeah. Yeah.
he says it talks about not harming, and he says, and it's not puberty. He says it's not to wait for puberty. It's
Right.
you wait until it's not going to be harmful to her somehow. And it can't
Hmm.
be harm in any sense, because obviously if you're having sex with a 9-year-old girl, you're doing
Of
some
course.
harm to her.
Of course.
But what it really sounds like, what it really sounds like in the Muslim sources is, it sounds like you're waiting until your grown man penis is not just going to, there's no way to say it, you're not going to
Yeah.
just tear her open
Right.
because she's so small. It sounds like you're
Right.
waiting for her to be physically capable of inserting a grown male penis into her. Now here's the even more disturbing part. You find in the Muslim sources, you find in the Hadith, in their best collections of
Yep.
Hadiths, you find these passages about someone coming to Muhammad and saying, "Hey, I'm married. Hey, I just got married." Muhammad says, "What'd you marry? Did you marry a virgin, or did you marry, grown woman?" And grown woman,
Right.
or someone who's been married before, something like that. And the guy said, "Yeah, I married a matron." And Muhammad says, "Why didn't you marry a virgin?" So, and you have differences in the Hadith, but some of them
Yeah.
say, why don't you have a liking for the virgins and for fondling them? He
Mm.
says fondling.
Yeah.
And then he says, what about the virgins and playing with them? So there's some sort of fondling and playing that you do with virgins. And
Hmm.
notice this isn't just having sex with a virgin, because then it wouldn't be some ongoing thing that you do with virgins.
Hmm.
So what in the world is he doing? What in the world is Muhammad talking about where he thinks that there's something you do with virgins that you do, for an extended period of time, because otherwise, you just go in and have sex and then they're not a virgin anymore. There's
Right.
something you do that he describes as fondling and playing with virgins that is
Hmm.
even preferable to having sex with a grown woman. What is
Hmm.
it? Well, what it
Right.
really sounds like, according to the Muslim sources, is that, think about it. How do you know when a little prepubescent girl is capable of handling sex with a grown man? It
Right.
seems like you marry her and you just kind of play around with her until you can kind of tell that she's ready for it.
Right.
And it seems like where you'd have to be playing around with her to kind of get a sense of when she's going to be ready for
Hmm.
sex. And then when you can say, "Oh, you know what? I think she's ready. So let's set up the final
Right.
consummation here." And so that's what it sounds like according to the Muslim sources.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
sounds absolutely disgusting. And this is the pattern of conduct for all people. And
Yeah.
the problems continue because Muhammad dies when Aisha's 18. And because he was just didn't want to be compared with other men, he made it a rule in the Quran that no one can marry his wives after him. And so Muhammad, who's a mercy to all mankind,
Right.
according to Islam, he leaves Aisha as a widow from the age of
Yeah.
18 all the way to her death in her
Hmm.
60s,
Hmm.
and just a childless widow her
Yeah.
entire life. And so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
the relationship she got to experience in life. Never.
Basically a life sentence as a widow. He basically gave her a life sentence as a
Mhm.
widow. But it also explains, David, that in the Hadith, it also explains how Muhammad would take baths with Aisha, and it even talks about him placing his hand between her legs and so forth, and bathing with her. So it kind of explains that the
Sucking on her
idea of
tongue.
playing, yeah, playing and fondling and that type of thing. But David, as you know, this is an area of great embarrassment, and so embarrassing that Muslims have been trying to tweak the evidence and try to say, "Oh, no, 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 he had sex with Aisha when she was 18." You recently did a debate last month with Ken Bomber, where he was arguing that the age of Aisha was wrong, even though you cited all the reliable sources of Islam, the Hadith, Al-Bukhari, and Muslim, and Ibn Majah, and all the other reliable Hadith, Abu Dawud, and so forth. And he basically just basically he threw that all to the curb and said, "Yeah, but this encyclopedia says this, and this modern author says this." And it really was quite an embarrassment, David. To be honest with you, I was absolutely astonished at the fact that he calls himself well, I'm assuming he's a Sunni Muslim, and he's not even following the Sunnah, which is the Quran, the Hadith, the Sirah, and so forth. And he just basically rejected all the 11 sources that you were pointing to that confirmed that Aisha was 6 years old when he contracted the marriage and consummated the marriage at 9 years old. So even Shabir Ali, whom we both know, has gone so far as to say that she was much later, she was much older. The only scholars, I think, like Yasser Qadi, at least have enough sense to come out and say, look, can you stop with this stupidity?
Mhm.
She was
Yeah,
six years
he calls
old.
them liars. He says
Yeah, he
he
called
says
them
you're lying. Mhm.
straight out lying. And at least he has, the guy who talked about the holes in the narrative of the Quran's compilation. At least he had enough honesty to say, look, guys, let's stop playing these games. She was 6 years old when he contracted the marriage. She was a little girl, et cetera, et cetera. Maybe you can talk towards that, David, because a lot of modern day Muslims are really they're trying to do what they accuse you and I of doing, the Jews and the Christians, of corrupting our texts and our sources, our scriptures. And yet there they are corrupting their sources like the Hadith and so forth, basically saying that Bukhari lied, a Muslim lied, Abu Dawud lied, and all the other Al-Tabari, Ibn Kathir was a liar, and so forth. Maybe you can talk towards that, David, because this is really revision at its best.
Yeah, so I mean, the positive side of this is that it was much more common like 12 years ago, like 10 or 12 years ago. Almost every Muslim speaker you'd ask would say that yeah, Aisha was significantly older than 9. She's probably 18 or 21 or something like that. Whereas now you've got a lot of people admitting that Aisha was in fact 9 years old, just because people are ready to show them their sources. Hey, what do you do about Bukhari? What do you do about Sahih Muslim, and so on? But yeah, with Kenny Bomer, I mean, I had no idea who he was. He challenged me, so he challenged me to a debate, and I saw he had a YouTube channel and so on. He's debated before, but he's the one who suggested a debate on Muhammad and Aisha, and I was like, what is he thinking? And he initially titled the debate, "Was Muhammad a pedophile?" And I was like,
Okay.
oh my goodness. You seriously want to debate on whether Muhammad is a pedophile? By the way, this ties into the issue of Muhammad and Aisha. Now,
Hmm.
people who have been following me for a lot of years, I mean, back before I was on YouTube, I was writing articles for Answering Islam and so on. You could
Yeah.
still go back, um, look at some things I wrote from back in the day. But I used to say, hey, we shouldn't be calling Muhammad a pedophile because a lot of psychiatrists classified pedophilia as a disorder if the man was primarily or exclusively sexually attracted to prepubescent girls. And so it's debatable because Muhammad was apparently sexually attracted to almost anything, right? So it didn't look like he was exclusively attracted to little girls, but I think you could make a case that he was, primarily, given his emphasis on Aisha, primarily. But there's something weird. So anyway, the point is, I would say, hey, given what the technical term of pedophile, there's a popular usage of pedophile, which is anyone who's attracted to a kid. But I would say, hey, given the technical meaning, we shouldn't be calling Muhammad a pedophile because it has this technical meaning, and it's not obvious that he fits that technical meaning. In fact, in the exclusive sense, he was clearly attracted to more than children. So that's why I said back then. But notice that's kind of weird, right? Because we want to say there's anyone who's attracted to children has a problem, even if you're still attracted to grown women and old women. If you're attracted to children at all, you've got a problem. And fortunately, the DSM-5, this is the standard work that there is in diagnosing mental illnesses. Under their discussion now of pedophilia, they give some criteria. Muhammad meets all the criteria hands down. And then what you do is you specify whether it's exclusive type or non-exclusive type. In other words, hey, you fit the definition of a pedophile. Now, is it exclusive? You're just attracted to children, or you're attracted to other people as well. So now we can say Muhammad's a pedophile according to the official definition. He's non-exclusive type pedophile. So you've got those kinds of issues. But anyway, the point is, back in the day, I was trying to give the benefit of the doubt as much as I could, but Muslims were over and over and over again saying she was 18 or even older and so on. And now we get down to our time and they're admitting it. So I had no idea what Kenny Bomer had up his sleeve. I didn't know what his position was going to be. I found a clip of him saying that a grown man who's attracted to little girl has problems and so on. But I had no idea how he was going to justify Muhammad's relationship with Aisha. So I had no clue what was going on when I went in there, what he's going to have up his sleeve. But yeah, he just took a bunch of modern sources of people, usually not any sort of expert in Islam, who were saying that her age is disputed by Muslims. And that's true. Now Muslims dispute it all the time. Now you have people like Kenny Bomer and you have people like Shabir Ali, and they're saying, we don't know how old she was and so on. So yes, it's obviously disputed. But it was just funny because, I had started in my opening statement. I read multiple sources, but then I would just give the references to people who want to read more. So I would say, here's a passage from Sahih al-Bukhari, and I would read it. And then I would say, for more in Sahih al-Bukhari, and I'll give a bunch more references. I probably gave 25 or 30 sources saying that Aisha was 9 years old. And then Kenny, he comes back, he's got his modern stuff. And then he would read someone in one of his modern sources saying, and Ibn Kathir and Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, they say that Aisha was older. And I'm like, wait a minute. Unfortunately, I had the sources, but Ibn Kathir said that she was 9 years old. And he said, it's not disputed by anyone.
Right. That's right.
Ibn Kathir, you're quoting Ibn Kathir to say that she was older than I. Say, where? Give me the source. Give me the source. Because Ibn Kathir said no one disputes it. And then Ibn Hajar al-Asqalani, he's considered the greatest hadith scholar of all time, saying that he said that Aisha was older than 9 years old. He's the one who said that she hadn't reached puberty because she was still playing with dolls, right? He's the one who points that out, that she was prepubescent. And so it's clear that it's either just total deception, saying, oh, these sources support this older age. It's either just total deception, or it's just complete ignorance, and they're just, I don't know what they're doing, but they're even the people he's appealing to, the sources that they use agree with me. Right. And it got to the point where I was just saying, can you give one source? Can you give one actual source to say that she was older than I? Just one. I gave you dozens. Can you give me one? Can you just give me one? He couldn't give one. And so but that's the situation. And that's why you'd think it's just a really bad idea to debate it if that's going to be the situation. Because if you really have Muslims who are bothered by their prophet having sex with a little girl, you don't ever want to discuss this in public, because if you discuss it in public, then someone's going to bring out all the sources. Whereas if you're just discussing it with your Muslim friend in private and not having someone bring out all the sources, you'll have people going, oh yeah, no one really knows. It was so long ago. The sources probably say all kinds of different things, and who
Right.
knows? And that will work in an atmosphere of ignorance. But as soon as you step on stage and someone starts rattling off the sources,
Yeah.
it becomes massively one-sided, because it's a totally one-sided issue. And so it's the older generation understood this, right? When you go
Yeah.
back to like Ahmed Deedat and Zakir
Yep.
Naik, even the earlier days of Shabir Ali and Jamal Badawi and so on, they understood you do not bring these issues out. You don't debate topics like this, because your Muslim audience and your Christian audience isn't going to know these things. And so it's not a problem for them. It's not a problem that Muhammad had sex with a prepubescent girl, because they don't know about it. As soon as you say, let's debate it, now all of a sudden everyone knows about it.
Yeah.
And so they understood, don't debate sensitive issues. In fact, they love to prefer debating just Christian topics.
Exactly.
And but now you've got this new generation. They think we can defend Muhammad against this criticism, we can defend Muhammad against that criticism,
Yeah.
and they're just helping expose Muhammad even more. So yeah, that's the situation. And by the way, just a little side note.
Yeah.
When I first heard that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl, I thought, no way, there's no way this can be true, because I heard it from someone who had read it in what's that Voice of the Martyrs.
Voice of the Martyrs.
Voice of the Martyrs. This is in the 90s. This is in the
Yeah.
90s. And the Christian said, hey, I saw in Voice of the Martyrs that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl. I was like, there's no way. And I said that because Islam is popular in prison. I was thinking the bottom of the barrel in prison is snitches and pedophiles. And if people knew that Muhammad is a pedophile, he would not be popular in prison. It would be completely ridiculed in prison. And so I eventually found out that he did have sex with a prepubescent girl. And it's just a weird situation where if people in prison knew that, it would not be a popular religion.
No, wouldn't. But David, I also find that, I don't know if you've been noticing this, but I noticed this with my debates with Shabir in the past couple of years. They're beginning to chip away at the Hadith. I mean, the Sahih Bukhari, they'll say these are Sahih, they're sound, they are the most reliable sources outside of the Quran. They're the second inspiration, some Muslim scholars have called them. So Sahih al-Bukhari, Sahih Muslim, Abu Dawud, and all these, Ibn Majah. And what I'm beginning to find is that Muslims are beginning to chip away or move away from these sources. Like Shabir, a couple of years ago when I debated him and I brought up the cave incident where Muhammad was attacked by the spirit that choked him and told him to recite, in the name of your Lord, recite. He goes, what should I recite? And then Muhammad became suicidal. Shabir Ali says, well, those sources contradict the Quran, so we really don't accept them. And what you're beginning to see is Muslims are beginning to kick the Hadith to the curb, throwing it under the bus, because the fact that Kenny Bomber would simply ignore all those sources you provided, what's to say? Why don't we just throw the whole thing out? Become Quran only, become Quranis. As there is a movement called the Quranis, they only hold to the Quran. So it seems to me that the Hadith itself is becoming basically questionable, and it's becoming, for a lot of Muslims, they're basically beginning to kick it to the curb. Do you see that as well, David?
Oh yeah, and I mean, you can see that in the life of a Muslim friend in a relatively short period of time, just based on embarrassment. So going all the way back to when I was having discussions with Nabil when he was still a Muslim. So we're in college, we're having these discussions. For a couple of years, we focused on Christian topics. Eventually we got into Islamic topics, but he would make a claim about Muhammad, and I didn't have a lot of clue about how to investigate Islam. So I looked up what's their earliest source, their best source according to scholars, and it was Ibn Asaq. And so I went to Ibn Asaq and I would start showing him, hey, here's what you said about Muhammad and here's what your source says. So you're wrong according to your own source. And then his response after looking at some of what we found in Ibn Asaq, his response was, don't go to Ibn Asaq, go only to Sahih al-Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. He goes, because they had the careful methodology of sifting through material to find the most reliable narrations. And so I don't trust Ibn Asak's methodology. I'm only going to go with Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim. So then I just went to Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim, and I did the same thing. I would use these passages to show Nabil that what he believed about Muhammad was false. And eventually got to the point where he just said, those are hadith, they're not the Quran, so I'm not bound by those. Only come to me with something that's in the Quran. And so you can see very quickly, just based on levels of embarrassment, that Muslims have this tendency to start throwing out their sources. And notice it's lose-lose, because if you say, hey, these hadiths are reliable sources, great, then your prophet was one of the most messed up people who's ever existed. This is a guy spiritually. I mean, he thought his initial impression was that he was demon possessed. He was suicidal. He admittedly delivered revelations from the devil and blamed the devil for these saying that, getting him to say that you could pray to 3 pagan goddesses. He was a victim of black magic spell that gave him delusional thoughts and false beliefs. The way he received revelation sounds like something out of an exorcist film. So you have all these kinds of problems. Then you have all these moral problems, like him having sex with a prepubescent little girl. And so if you say, hey, here's how we learned about your prophet, well, great. Don't tell us that your prophet's the greatest man ever, because he's like the least reliable person in history. The alternative is, oh no, we don't trust those sources. Well, great. Then we know next to nothing about your prophet, and we don't even, why should we trust him? Oh, because of the Quran. The Quran mentions the name Muhammad like 4 times. Right. And those could even be titles. So it gives us very little information. And by the way, how are we supposed to know how the Quran was revealed, or what it had to do with Muhammad, or what the historical situations were, if we throw out the later sources? Right. We can't even understand a lot of the Quran without understanding the outside sources and what they mean and what the historical background is. So you have the Quran cursing Abu Lahab. Yeah. Well, who's that? Who's that? Yeah. It doesn't say. It gives you no information on who that is, or what the situation is, or what he did that he's being cursed there. So what's the situation? You don't know. So so they're throwing out all these sources, but without those sources, you have no idea whether you should believe in Muhammad, whether you can trust it. You have no idea of the Quran or how it was preserved or how it was put together. You don't know anything. And so either way, they're in trouble. And this is one of the reasons that we see that Islam is imploding. And so that's just the situations they're stuck in. Do we admit that Muhammad is this horrible person, or do we try to cast doubt on those sources? But you see in the life of Shabir Ali, you see it. He's becoming more and more skeptical of these sources. What's interesting is he was in a discussion with Mufti Abu Layth, and he just admitted, look, I just find it problematic, the idea that a guy who's a moral pattern of conduct would have sex with a little girl. I can't believe that. So he's taking, here's my image of what a good man does. According to the Hadith, that's not what Muhammad did. Therefore, I have to throw out my sources. Whereas notice the obvious the obvious choice is, wait a minute, if this is what a good man would do, and that's not what Muhammad did according to the sources, so much for Muhammad, right? Muhammad is not our guy. He's not a good pattern of conduct, as he's said to be in the Quran. So the Quran's wrong. Moreover, I can't trust this guy's revelations. If he's actually getting a revelation from God telling him to go have sex with a little girl, and I find that morally reprehensible, then I can't believe in any of this. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, also, when you look at the fact, David, that there's inconsistency all around. There's inconsistency. And yet, Shabir Ali and Ken Balmer they'll grow their beards according to the Hadith, shave their mustaches. Where do you get that from? Oh, it comes from the Hadith. The way they walk into their mosques, the way they walk into a bathroom, where they can pray, where they cannot pray, the posture of prayer, all these things come from the Hadith. Or why do they pray 5 times a day? The Salat being 5 times a day. It's all based on the night journey. And what is that night journey? Without the Hadith, what is the farthest mosque, and et cetera, et cetera? Yeah. Yeah. What's funny is there was a Muslim who debated James White years ago. I think his name's is it Hamza? Is it Hamza Abdul Malik? Oh, yeah. Hamza, forgot his last name. Wait, yeah. I know the guy you're talking about. Yeah. So one of James White's early debates was with a Muslim, and he had the debate, but that guy eventually became a Quran only Muslim. Yeah. And if I've hung out with him a few times, and super nice guy, really fun. He's hilarious to be around and so on. But he eventually became a Quran only. Muslim.
Yeah.
And I was talking to him. We were at ODU. He came down for some debates we were having at ODU, and I said, "Hey, you're a Quran-only Muslim. What do you do about the Shahada? Because you have a Shahada saying there's no God but Allah in the Quran, but it doesn't say there's no God but Allah and Muhammad is his messenger, and this is what you recite to become a Muslim." It doesn't say any of that. I say, so I said, "So do you recite the Shahada?" And he goes, "Nah, it's shirk." I was like, "Whoa,
Yeah.
you just called the Shahada shirk, right?"
Yep.
He said, "Yeah." He goes, "There's no God and Muhammad. What are you talking about? God and Allah and Muhammad. There's no Muhammad in there." He goes,
Yeah.
he starts breaking it down. He said, "Muhammad's a mailman. Muhammad's a
Yeah.
mailman. He receives the Quran, he delivers it, his job is done."
Yeah.
That's what he did. And there are problems with that view because, again, the Quran says that you have to follow Muhammad's decisions, that he's
Yeah.
your pattern of conduct, and so on. So it looks like it's pointing to Muhammad. But it is interesting that you even have Muslims who are recognizing the implications of throwing out these hadith. You start throwing out the hadith and saying they're unreliable. Great. That's most of your most significant Islamic practices are from the hadith, not from the Quran.
Yeah, I mean, they're putting a blade to their throat by doing that. I mean, even the Sirah, David, if we just throw out the Sirah of Ibn Ishaq, what was Muhammad's mother's name? Does the Quran tell you that? No. Does the Quran tell you what his father's name? Again, without the Sirah, without the Hadith, which are really fillers, they're what fill in the gaps in the Quran. Most of the Quran would just be contrary to what it says. It says it's mubin, it's clear. Without the Hadith, the Quran is a really it's a cryptic book. You really can't understand much of it.
Yep.
But David, coming back to Aisha, a lot of folks listening to us tonight are thinking, wow, how can a man marry a girl that's 6 years old? The Quran actually allows you to marry a girl that's even younger than 6 years old. In fact, let me put it out there. There is no age limit according to the Quran. So, David, maybe you can say a little bit about Surah 65 and what it talks about the iddah, the waiting periods between a divorced woman, a widow, and a girl that has not yet reached menstruation.
Yeah, so the Quran had already laid down that if you're divorcing a woman, then there should be a waiting period. And it's pretty, it's pretty smart. It's in case it's waiting period before she's allowed to get married again. And so the idea is that if this woman, gives birth a little while later, you don't want some confusion if you divorced her and then she went off and married another guy and then she finds out she's pregnant. You don't want confusion about who the dad is. So there was a waiting period of a few menstrual cycles. She had to go through a few menstrual cycles before she could marry again. So that was all fine for a while. But then Muhammad's companions started raising some objections. What about our wives who don't have a monthly menstrual cycle for some reason? What do we do in that situation? Because they don't have menstrual cycles. And there were three kinds. It was women who are too old, so they've gone through menopause. Girls who are too young, so they haven't reached puberty yet, and women who are pregnant. They're pregnant, so they don't have a menstrual cycle. And so Surah 65, verse 4 was revealed in response to those questions. And Allah says, in the case of girls who are too young for a monthly menstrual cycle, instead of waiting three menstrual cycles, wait 3 months instead. So that's Allah's ruling. And I brought this up in the debate, and Kenny Bomer, when he was asked, well, what does this verse mean? He said, well, some women have a disorder where they don't have a menstrual cycle, even though they're fully grown and so on. And the ridiculous part about that, I mean, all the commentators agree with me. In fact, the historical background of that verse was someone saying, what about girls who are too young to have reached the age of menstruation? That's the historical background. That's what it's answering. And that's how it was used. And even in Sahih Bukhari, where he says this is talking about prepubescent girls. And so just a silly scenario, but you're right. All it says is that you can marry and divorce a girl who hasn't reached puberty yet. She doesn't have a menstrual cycle, and that she can then be married to someone else. So notice, a girl can be married, a guy can have sex with her, eventually divorce her. She'll have to wait 3 months. then she can be passed on to another guy who marries her, has sex with her, then divorce it, and all before she's ever even reached puberty. What's interesting is, for years they would say we're liars for saying this, even though it's what all of their commentators say.
Yeah.
But I recently posted a video where Muhammad Hijab admits this, and it's interesting because he was responding to Quran-only Muslims. You've got all these Quran-only Muslims who are trying to avoid all of these embarrassing hadiths, so they're becoming Quran-only Muslims. And Muhammad Hijab pointed out, well, if you're abandoning these hadiths, now you've got problems as well. Don't think you're safe now because you've thrown out the hadith. You have greater problems. And one of the examples he gave was that if you take Surah 65, verse 4, it says you can have sex with girls who haven't reached puberty yet. It says if you go to the hadith, well, you got Muhammad, he was waiting on something. So it looks like you're waiting for the age when they're physically ready. Right. The Quran does not put that on. The Quran doesn't say there's anything you need to wait for. So he said, he called it extreme pedophilia. He says, if you just go with the Quran, you would think it's permissible. It's allowed. It's halal to have sex with even a 5-year-old. That's not me. That's him saying. He says, if you just went with the Quran, you would think that you could have sex with a 5-year-old. And the other example he gave was, since the Quran allows you to strike your wives if you fear rebellion from them, he says, well, strike can mean all kinds of things in the Muslim sources. So how do you know it's not like strike at their necks, like you're killing someone? He says if you don't have other Muslim sources, you'd think you could chop your wife's head off if she gets out of line. So he's saying, hey, if you're just going Quran only, you got problems. But yeah, you're absolutely right, Tony. Surah 65, verse 4 allowed sex with prepubescent girls. And that's why people like Kenny Bomer and others who find what Muhammad did embarrassing. Oh, Muhammad wouldn't have had sex with a 9-year-old girl. Why? It's perfectly normal according to the Quran.
Yeah. And I'm just looking at a couple of Quran versions here, David, and in particular, Halali Khan actually mentions
They insert it parenthetically just to make sure it's clear.
65 verse 4. And those of your women as have passed the age of monthly courses, for them the Ida, the prescribed period, if you have doubts about their periods, is 3 months. And for those who have no courses, and then he says, that is, they are still immature. And so there he actually admits that you're talking about immature females, immature girls who are girls who have not yet reached menstruation. And so I want our viewers to kind of take this all in, what Dr. Wood has been talking about here, because remember, this man, Muhammad, according to the Quran, according to Surah 33:21, he is the pattern of conduct that Allah tells us to emulate. If you want to be pleasing to Allah, if you want to have hope in Allah and hope on the last day, you are to imitate Muhammad. That's why Muslim men today imitate the Prophet by how they dress, how they wear, how they walk into the mosques, and so forth and so on. And just think about this. Is this the one that God Almighty, the creator of heaven and earth, the God who is the foundation of objective morality and purpose, the one who is the defender of the fatherless, is this a command that God would have given to a 7th century Arabian Bedouin, an Arab trader in Saudi Arabia? And when you compare the life of Muhammad, or even the character of Muhammad, to Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus did not go around oogling little girls and looking to have relationship with little girls and so forth. His life was a life of sanctity, a life of purity and holiness. And yet Muslims tell us that Muhammad is the last of the prophets, that he is in many respects, even though they say that we honor all the prophets, it's pretty obvious, right, David, that to Muslims, Muhammad is it. He is the prophet par excellence.
No question. I mean, they'll say, oh, we believe in all the prophets. And what they really mean is we believe what Muhammad said about all the prophets. So they're really just believing one. I mean, if I come along and I contradict every prophet who's ever lived and I say I'm the prophet, but I agree with all those previous prophets, but just believe what I say about them, well, people would really just be believing in me.
Yeah. So really, folks, really look at this and just consider the difference between the character of Jesus and Muhammad here. They're very, very different altogether. So David, let's move along then. So in terms of Aisha, we've discussed that and the fact that the Quran allows for marrying prepubescent girls even younger than 6. It doesn't even give an age limit. Who would be the next on the list? Would we be talking about Zainab, the wife of the adopted son of Muhammad's son Zaid?
Yeah, as far as this guy clearly having issues, there are several more that you could point to, but this would be the big one, and Safiya would be a huge problem as well, just because I mean they tortured and killed her husband. They killed the males in her family, and then he takes her just because he can't control himself. And it's right after he was poisoned. So it's like you think, hey, wait, a woman poisoned me because I slaughtered her family. Oh, let me marry this woman whose family we just slaughtered too. It's like and then one of his followers has to stand outside the tent because he's think there's no way this woman's not going to try and kill Muhammad tonight after what we just did to her family. So you've got problems like that. But and interestingly, it's a far bigger issue for Muslims during the time of Muhammad, the issue with Zainab. That's the one that the Quran is constantly trying to defend itself. The Muslim sources are constantly trying to defend Muhammad against accusations arising from that. So Muhammad had an adopted son named Zayd. So Muhammad had an adopted son named Zayd, who was called Zayd bin Muhammad. So he's called Zayd, son of Muhammad.
Yeah.
And he married a very beautiful young woman who's Muhammad's cousin named Zainab. And one day, according to the Muslim sources, one day Muhammad went over to visit his adopted son, and he wasn't there. Instead, Muhammad was greeted by Zainab, who was wearing almost nothing at the time. So what we would think of as like a nightie or something like that. And so Muhammad leaves, but he starts praising Allah. He starts praising Allah. And the idea is that Allah revealed to him right there that you're going to have this man's wife. Now, Tony, before we move on with the story, what did Jesus think about someone who's lusting after another man's wife, period, deciding that he's going to marry a woman who's already married, let alone to someone who's your adopted son?
Be an adulterer at heart.
Yeah. So Muhammad is an adulterer at heart. We even have Muslim sources about Muhammad would just be walking down the street and he would pass by an attractive woman and he would have to run home to one of his wives to have sex with her. And it's like, no self-control at all. Like I just saw, and Muslims will say, but that's a good example because, rather than fall into sin, he went and satisfied his desire. His point is not the point, right? The point is, you have so little self-control that just seeing a woman, you're like, I have to have sex right now. I can't resist myself. This is your pattern of conduct. And that's why they talk about him being covered in semen and having the sexual drive of 30 men. Whereas we would look at that and say, hey, look, D. Wood here is a big fan of sex, but there's something wrong with this guy. This guy would be classified with some sort of illness beyond just the pedophilia thing. So Muhammad gets a revelation from Allah telling him that he's going to have the wife of his own adopted son. But then something interesting happens. His adopted son, Zayd, finds out that Muhammad is attracted to his wife. So he says, I'll divorce her so that you can have her. And Muhammad tries to say no, because he's worried about being embarrassed. And so the Quran actually condemns Muhammad in Surah 33, verse 37, for trying to conceal what was revealed to him, namely that he's going, just like it was revealed to him that he's going to take the 6-year-old daughter of his adopted, of his best friend. Now he's going to take the wife of his own adopted son. Allah criticizes him for it. Says, hey, you've got to do this. So Muhammad denies it for a little while. Zayd divorces her, and Muhammad marries her, and it turned out to be a scandal anyway. People say, wait, he just took the wife of his own adopted son. It's like, what is that? What is that? That was your daughter-in-law. You're having sex with you just took your daughter-in-law for your wife. What in the world is this? And so we had a couple of Quran revelations that came out of that. You got Surah 33, verse 37, where Allah actually convinces the Muslim community, and this would be like top 5. If you're talking about like dumbest revelations in the Quran. I got to put together a top 5 list or top 10 list, because you have these passages. So you have passages like, things on this list are like, they're so absurd they can't come from God. So this would be things like when people were making fun of Muhammad, saying he's plagiarizing other people's stories, and Allah actually responds and says, no, because the person he's talking to is foreign, whereas these revelations are in Arabic. It's like, wait a minute, you don't believe that stories can be translated from one language to another? Allah doesn't know that there's this thing called translation. So it's just like a really stupid thing to say. It's like, it'd be like me, like, I come, hey, here's my book, War and Peace. And you say, David, you didn't write War and Peace. You say, yeah, well, that was in Russian. This is in English. So obviously I wrote this, right? It's like insanely idiotic. But that was Muhammad's defense. And so here Allah says, Surah 33, verse 37 of the Quran, I encourage everyone to read it. That Allah justifies Muhammad's relationship by saying that Muhammad has to marry her so there's a reason. The reason Muhammad has to marry the wife of his own adopted son is so that other men who are struggling with whether they can marry the wives of their own adopted sons, they can understand that it's totally halal. Now, I regard that as one of the most insane things ever. I mean, notice, even if Allah wanted to tell people, okay, guys, it's okay to marry the wives of your own adopted sons, all he has to do is say it. It's in the Quran, right? You don't have to, and this is so important that Muhammad needs to actually go and do it. You don't need that. It's ridiculous. But on top of that, I mean, Tony, how many people do you know in your life who struggle with this? They struggle with, gosh, can I really take the wife of my own adopted son? I'm really struggling with this. I've never met.
No.
I've never met anyone who struggled with that. And yet it's such a big issue that Allah says, we need to nip this thing in the bud right now. We need Muhammad to set the example for all men that it is okay to marry the wife of your own adopted son after causing the divorce by lusting after her, right? So that's absurd in itself. The other absurd part is, according to the Quran, that's never a situation that could ever arise again, because the Quran also, in the same chapter, verses 4 and 5, Surah 33, verses 4 to 5, Allah abolishes adoption. He abolishes adoption. And when you bring this up to Muslims, they say, no, we can adopt. It's like, no, you don't know what adoption is. You can take care of orphans, yes, if you want. You do not adopt them into your family where they become part of your family and take on your family name. And so that's what adoption is. You're becoming a part of that family, taking on that family name. In order to cover up the embarrassment and the accusations that were flying at Muhammad, Allah actually reveals that there's no more adoption. Call adopted sons from now on by their families' names, not by your family's names. And now they're just your brothers in the faith. They're no longer your adopted sons. And so that was to justify his relationship. So from then on, Zayd was no longer called Zayd, son of Muhammad, because he wasn't anymore. So this is all to say, hey, it's okay for Muhammad to take that guy's, his brother in faith's wife, because it's not his adopted son, because there's no more adoption. Well, notice, adoption is one of the most humane practices ever. It's one of the greatest practices ever. So you've got people who they've lost their entire families and so on, and now you're giving them your family, right? They're becoming part of your family, taking on your family name, and you treat them exactly the way you would treat your biological children. So awesome practice. Allah says we'll have none of that. Why, Allah? Why are you abolishing this practice? Because I need to defend Muhammad, because people are making fun of him. But notice, if there's no more adoption, then you have no more adopted sons. If you have no more adopted sons, there's never going to be a situation where you would want to marry the wife of your adopted son, because you're never going to have an adopted son whose wife you would want to marry. It's not a situation that could arise. And yet the same chapter says Muhammad has to marry Zainab so that men understand it's okay to marry the wives of their adopted sons. So Allah says this is so important, Muhammad has to do this, and it's a situation that could never arise again. And it's just, it's like, how do you not immediately look at this as a Muslim and say, this is not from God. This is not from God. This is ridiculous.
It's so convoluted and so confused. You say, well, we're doing this so that, fathers don't feel guilty about wanting their adopted sons' wives. And then Allah through Muhammad abolishes adoption altogether. But isn't it interesting, David, that in the Bible, adoption is the language that is used of believers in Christ, that God has adopted us through Jesus Christ to be his children, and it's an act of grace. So in the Bible, adoption is important. Paul mentions it in Romans and in Galatians that we receive the spirit of adoption, that we're not just orphans, we are adopted children of God. And of course, that language that Paul uses, the Greek word huiothesia, is the Romans, when they adopted kids, like Caesar Augustus was the adopted son of Julius Caesar, even though he wasn't his biological son, adoption law says that an adopted child has the full rights and privileges as if he or she were a biological child. And so it's interesting how the God of the Bible uses the language of adoption. He certainly hasn't abolished adoption, but he uses adoption to bring us into his family through Christ. But the God of Islam abolishes adoption altogether. And another thing too, David, in Surah 33, by abolishing adoption, by removing Zaid from being the son of Muhammad, you stop the prophetic line, because the idea here, that's why it appears in Surah 33 that Muhammad is the seal of the prophets. It appears in the very same surah. And that's because now that Zaid is no longer his legal son through adoption, the prophetic line ends with Muhammad. There is no prophet after Muhammad. So there's a lot of stuff going on in Surah 33, to be sure.
And little unrelated side note is Surah 33 used to be about the size of Surah 2,
Yes.
Surah Al-Baqarah, right? So this used to contain hundreds of verses. This was the chapter that contained the verses, because there were multiple ones, about breastfeeding adults. One saying that you have to breastfeed an adult woman. I mean, a woman has to breastfeed an adult man, even if he has a beard, 10 times if he's going to be around her. And then that was abrogated and changed to 5. But if anyone out there doesn't know what we're talking about already, there's a situation that might arise. A woman might have to work around a man when her husband's gone, right? You could have like a servant who works around your house or something like that, and you know that you're going to be out of town. So what's your wife going to be doing while this guy's here? So this issue is brought to Muhammad. Hey, there's a grown man who's got to be around my wife while I'm gone. What do we do? And Allah revealed, no problem. Just have your wife breastfeed the man 10 times, and then he'll, technically be her foster son. And then you don't have to worry about them doing anything while you're gone, because she's put her breast in his mouth over and over and over again. So there's not going to be any sexual attraction there. Well, interestingly, Muhammad's wives and women in general thought this was a horrible, insanely ridiculous idea. But as soon as Muhammad died, they're preparing his body and stuff. And Aisha, as soon as he dies, Aisha comes out, oops, I had the only copy of those verses in Surah 33, and a sheep ate them. And so we have the Muslim sources talking about a sheep eating that, and the verse of stoning, which is also stoning an adulteress, which was also in Surah 33. And Aisha was on the receiving end of that. I mean, she was about to be stoned to death when she was accused of adultery. So you've got these verses that the women didn't really like in Surah 33, and all of a sudden these verses are gone. What's interesting is, even though you have that's Sunan Ibn Majah, number 1944, so that's straight up hadith. You have Ubay ibn Ka'b and Aisha saying that most of Surah 33 was lost. So it wasn't just a sheep came in and ate those two verses are standing outside by themselves. The sheep came in and ate a whole mess of verses, right? And that's what's amazing. We look at Surah 33, one of the most disgusting things ever written. Muhammad had to marry the wife of his own adopted son. We got to abolish adoption. That's also the chapter where, hey, Muhammad, everyone else gets 4 wives. You get as many as you want. It's allowing him to violate the commands of Allah because he's special. That's where you have all this disgusting stuff. But that's the stuff that survived Aisha's, the Sheepgate conspiracy, where Aisha has her sheep eat all these verses that they really don't like. And so that's just amazing. It's like layers of problems here.
Yeah, but you would think that if everyone had memorized the Quran, they'd be able to restore all of those verses. But as we see, large portions of the Quran have gone missing.
You
which is
don't, yeah,
about,
you do not get the impression that there were all these people who had the Quran memorized in
that's right.
the Muslim sources.
That's right. And even Zainab, the Quran never identifies who this woman is. And here again, we need to rely on the sources, the extra Quranic sources that tell us that her name was Zainab.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
once again, if we were just to go with the Quran alone, we'd have no idea who this woman was and what her name was, and so forth and so on. So yeah, so that is quite an embarrassing story, to be sure.
Mhm.
So what would you say would be next in line? I think you had mentioned the woman from Khyber, David, the Jewish woman from Khyber.
Yeah, there's Safiya, and I mean, the main issue there is, they caught her husband,
Hmm.
and he knew where some treasure was hidden, and he wouldn't tell them. So Muhammad says, light a fire on his chest, and so
Yes.
they tortured him, and then beheaded him. And so you've got that issue. And then Muhammad, one of his companions, when they're dividing up the spoils of war, he chooses Safiya because she's so attractive. But then it gets reported to Muhammad, hey, Muhammad, um, this woman is really, really attractive. You sure you don't want her?
Mm.
And then Muhammad, oh, well, let me check her out. And so he sees her.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, I got to have her. So then he gave, I think he gave his companion seven. He had to give him 7 women in exchange for Safiya. But then right after that, it's interesting. Muhammad just skips these rules about having to wait these months, having to wait these 3 monthly menstrual cycles. They start heading back and stuff, and he marries her, and then goes in to consummate the marriage with her. And that's when he finds out one of his soldiers was waiting outside the tent to protect him. And Muhammad thought that was a really good idea. But that's connected to the issue that Muhammad was poisoned after the Battle of Khyber. And that's where, they slaughter all these people. And then a Jewish woman walks in, a Jewish woman whose entire family had been slaughtered in the name of Allah. She comes in and says, hey, Muhammad, I want to cook you a meal. And he says, duh, great, cool. I love food. Right. And he gets poisoned. One of his companions dies because he ate a little bit
Yeah,
before.
Bashar.
Yeah. And before Muhammad died. And I mean, so he died before Muhammad. But Muhammad eventually dies from this. It takes him about 3 years to die, but the poison basically did internal damage. And Muslims say, oh, poison can't kill you years later. Guys, talk to any doctor in the world, right? If you take enough of some kind of poison, it will kill you quickly. If you take less than what will kill you quickly, it can just do damage. It can mess up your internal organs so that you have ongoing medical problems, ongoing infections, and so on, until it eventually kills you. And that's exactly what happened to Muhammad. He says he felt pain from that time onward, to the point where shortly before his death, they were dragging him around with his feet dangling behind him on the ground.
Like
right?
Weekend at Bernie's.
Weekend at Bernie's, right? So Muhammad actually gets poisoned, does some internal damage, but not enough to kill him, all because he couldn't turn down a meal. And then he says, oh, look how hot she is, and I have to take her as my bride, even though she was in exactly the same situation that the woman who poisoned him was in. Namely, you killed all the men in my family, and I'm going to try and take you out. And so Muhammad's companion, who stands guard outside, he's like, are you serious? Right? You got one of us killed. You got a few of us poisoned, but one of us actually died, all because you couldn't resist some food. And now, because you can't resist a hot girl, now you're seriously putting your life on the line just to take her into your tent. So he thinks, hey, she might let him fall asleep and then, put a tent spike through his head or something like that. And so he stands guard, but she didn't end up doing that. So she wasn't like the other woman wanting to take Muhammad out. So you've got that situation, and probably the most important remaining issue would be Muhammad's slave girl.
Mm.
You know about Muhammad's slave girl? Muhammad
Go
had
ahead.
Muhammad had a Coptic Christian
Mary
slave girl,
the Copt.
Mary the Copt.
Mm.
And not according to me, according to Muslim sources,
Mm-hmm.
Muhammad got caught having sex. Now he's allowed to have sex with his slave girls. That's revealed in the Quran. It's he gets his wives and those whom his right hands possess. That's another lovely verse from Surah 33, Surah 33 of the Quran. And so Muhammad knows that he gets his slave girls, but it's just disrespectful to do that in one of your wives' beds. And so Hafsa one day goes out. She's got to go run some errands, do some shopping, and so on. And so she's out. Muhammad says, I'm going to take my slave girl that was given to me and go break her in Hafsa's bed while Hafsa's out. Meanwhile, Hafsa comes home early, catches Muhammad in her bed with his new slave girl, Mary the Copt, his new Christian slave girl. And she's, I mean, just think about the psychological impact on women. One, if it's just polygamy, right? If you have a wife, right? If you have, I mean, and we all know that polygamy was allowed for a time in the Bible and so on. God permits, God allows us to, well, the Bible says because of the hardness of our hearts, he lets us do certain things for a time and then tells us not to do them. But imagine the psychological impact on a woman. You get married. Oh, great. I got my husband. Oh, sorry, honey. You're not enough for me. I need another woman, a younger woman. And then you marry her. And then, sorry, ladies, the two of you together just aren't enough for me, and so on. And you do this until you've got 9 wives, even though the Quran says you can have 4. But Muhammad's got 9 wives. He's got Aisha. He's got Zainab, right? Aisha, she was apparently, the apple of his eye. But then he's got Zainab, who's one of the most beautiful women in Arabia. Safiya, she was the most beautiful woman in Khaybar. He's got this epic lineup of beautiful women. And it's like, we're not enough for you. We're not enough for you. You still need to bring your slave girl into the bed of one of your wives that you're supposed to respect. And you have so little respect for us that you're going to take your slave girl into my, I mean, I can just imagine my wife's reaction. She comes, it'd be a horrible reaction in my bed. Like if
we probably wouldn't be here right now talking if it was us.
It would be a very, it would be horrifying enough to just cheat on my wife with some slave girl or something like that. But if it was in our bed, that's
in
like
your own home, in your own bedroom.
Yeah. And keep in mind, that's Muhammad had different houses for his different wives. So that's not, that's our bed. That was Hafsa's bed. Muhammad comes, when it's his turn to be with her and so on, but that's her bed. And he's got a slave girl in there. So she was really upset. Muhammad said, well, just whatever you do, don't tell Aisha. So she runs and tells Aisha. And so Hafsa and Aisha, they're flipping out on Muhammad. And he says, look, okay, fine. In order to make this right, I'll say she's forbidden to me. And he swears an oath. I will never have sex with that woman again. And actually, she's a teenage girl, but I will never have sex with Mary the Copt again. She's haram to me. And here's where things get interesting. Because then after a while, Allah steps in there and Allah reveals Surah 66, verses 1-2, and tells Muhammad, what are you doing? What are you doing? I didn't tell you to take that oath and to forbid her to yourself. I didn't tell you that. So I'm allowing you to break your oath. And I'll go ahead and read it real quick.
Sure.
This is Surah 66, verse 1. O Prophet, why do you ban for yourself that which Allah has made lawful to you, seeking to please your wives? And Allah is oft forgiving, most merciful. Allah has ordained for you the dissolution of your oaths, or the Pickthall absolution from your oaths, or Shakir, the expiation of your oaths. So Allah says, hey, you swore an oath, and go ahead and break it so that you can go back to having sex with your slave girl. And I mean, just think about that, right? This is Allah saying, and notice the absurdity of the principle. Allah is saying, hey, I didn't order you to make that oath, therefore you're not bound by it. Go ahead and break it. Well, the incredibly vast majority of oaths that have ever been made weren't ordered by God, right? If I make an oath right now, God didn't order me to make that oath. So the vast, overwhelming majority, you're talking 99.99999999999% of all oaths that have ever been made were not ordered by God. And yet right here, in order to allow Muhammad to go back to having sex with his slave girl,
wow, yeah,
Allah says, hey, if I didn't order you to make an oath, you're not under it, man. You're allowed to break that oath. And this is just what we find over and over again. Islam is just laying down all these horrible principles and practices, like abolishing adoption or saying men can break oaths if they're not ordered by Allah, all to just justify any perverted thing that pops into Muhammad's head.
Yeah.
And it's just, this is the real heart of Islam. You've got that. You've got all the spiritual problems of Muhammad. You never have anything that makes you think that this is true. And you ask a Muslim today, hey, tell us about your prophet. They've heard of none of this. There's nothing that we just talked about, with the possible exception of Aisha, just because we've brought it up so much. There's nothing that we've discussed, not Muhammad becoming suicidal or thinking he's demon possessed, or being a victim of black magic, or getting caught having sex with his slave girl, or taking the wife of his own adopted son. They haven't heard of any of that. Their information has been filtered for them until all they hear is, yes, all Muhammad did was walk around helping everyone and helping widows and orphans, and that's all he did, and he's the greatest man who ever lived. And it's like, man, it's your apologists and your scholars are the biggest bunch of liars who've ever lived. They're giving you a false picture that you're serving. Muhammad's already a false prophet, but then they have to give you a false version of your false prophet. And guess what? This isn't a double negative situation where, oh, if you come up with a false version of your false prophet, that makes him a true prophet. You just got a false version of the most epic and most obvious false prophet in history. And that's just it's the heart of Islam right now.
You know, the revelation of convenience that we always see here in the case of Muhammad, David. Remember what Aisha once said? She said, it seems that your Lord is always in a hurry to grant you whatever you wish. And so I think Aisha was right. I think she was onto something.
That's why Aisha is my favorite character in the Muslim sources. I love Aisha.
She's tongue in cheek, and she called it out. She knew exactly what was going on. But even in Surah 66, they're basically, the women are being told, hey, you know what? You better just lump it, because Allah could simply give him other wives. You shouldn't be whining about him sleeping with his slave girl and so forth, because you're lucky to be married to him. And Allah, if he wanted, he could give him some other wives. And so it just seems, David, that everything in the Quran seems to be, everything is geared towards Muhammad, his needs, his ego, and so forth and so on. And it really does make you wonder. I mean, no wonder the Jews and Christians of Arabia, who at least were informed and knew their scriptures, there's a reason why they didn't accept him as a prophet from Allah. There's obviously a reason why. But when we look at this behavior, this is so unbecoming of someone who is supposed to be the mercy to mankind and to be the pattern for all humanity. And so I want our Muslim friends to know, if you're watching us, we're not saying this out of ill will towards you at all. In fact, everything David and I have talked about here come from your sources. That's what's informing us. It's not what Karen Armstrong wrote in History of God or some other modern writer, but your very sources are telling us this about your prophet. Doesn't that concern you? Doesn't that worry you, that your life, your destiny is resting on this man as the prophet of God? So I think, David, that if you look at the life of Muhammad, not just in this area, but just generally, he fits the description of a biblical false prophet.
No question. I mean, matter of fact, I would say he fits it better than anyone else in history. I mean, in terms of, matter of fact, I mean, specific things like Deuteronomy 18:20, which is funny because Muslims will go to Deuteronomy 18:18 and say, hey, there's a prophet like Moses. That must be Muhammad. Well, 2 verses later, you have this criterion. If someone speaks in the name of other gods or delivers a revelation that doesn't come from God, he's a false prophet. He would have to die. And Muhammad did both of those with the satanic verses. Muslims will say, we don't believe in the satanic verses. Well, I literally have 50 sources on the I have 50 Muslim sources on the satanic verses. But their leaders will tell them, nope, it never happened. because they try to just shield them from all of this horrible information about Muhammad. But then you have even Jesus saying, watch out for false prophets. They come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. And you look at Muhammad, and he comes to the Jews and Christians. Hey guys, I'm on your side. I'm a monotheist. We believe in the same prophet. You Christians, hey, I believe in Jesus. I believe in his virgin birth and his miracles. He's the Christ. Yeah, hey, we're all on the same page there. And then as soon as he gets to power, all of you have to be subjugated and become second-class citizens, or I'll slaughter you all in the name of Allah. So perfect example of a biblical false prophet. And if you just look at the history of how people have been able to believe in him, at first when he's an outnumbered prophet, he's going around saying, hey, I'm with the Jews and I'm with the Christians. Hey, I just believe in one God. I believe in Abraham. I believe in monotheism and polytheism, down with polytheism. Mm-hmm. And that was apparently already an attractive position to some people in Arabia, because there were people who viewed the Jews as kind of religious authorities, because it would say in the Quran, it kept saying, hey, look, go ask the Jews, go ask the Jews. So apparently it's common thought that, hey, these guys are in on something, and this is an upgrade for polytheism. Right. And so at first, Muhammad's not fighting. He's not doing all sorts of perverted things. It's just him and Khadijah and so on. And he's just preaching one God, and listen to my revelations. They're so wonderful. And hey, I'm in the Bible. There's references to me in the Bible. And the people he's talking to, they don't know any better. They don't know what's in the Bible.
Yeah.
Right? And so he gets enough followers, not a lot, but he gets enough followers to eventually leave the community and then form some alliances and so on. And eventually, by the time that people can start recognizing how messed up this guy is, well, guess what? He's gotten his followers to the point where they'll cut your head off. They'll cut your head off for criticizing him, right? So as his ability to silence critics increases, the number of horrible things that he does, the horrible and perverted things he does, increases. So now I can do more things because you can't say anything about it, because I'll chop your head off. And then you have, for 14 centuries in the Muslim world, you can't criticize Muhammad for all of these things, because they'll chop your head off. And then when you get down to our time, where you can't cut people's heads off in most places, you can't cut people's heads off for criticizing Muhammad. Now they have to give a false picture of Muhammad, start throwing all their sources out in order to keep people believing in Muhammad. And guys, this is not what a true prophet needs. This is not what the greatest man in history needs. The greatest man and the greatest prophet in history does not need 14 centuries of you getting your head chopped off if you point out the obvious and start pointing out these obvious absurdities, and doesn't need all of his followers and his greatest scholars lying for him to deceive people and give people a false picture of him. So a true prophet and the true greatest man in history would not need that. But if that's what Muhammad needs, and he obviously does, you're dealing with a false prophet, and definitely not the greatest man in history. I would regard him as the least trustworthy man in all of history, because you can find people who are more evil or worse or less reliable in specific ways, but when it comes to the total collection, right? I mean, how many other people can you think of who say they're getting revelations, but they also think they're demon possessed, and who try to hurl themselves off cliffs, and who promote polytheism and then blame the devil for tricking them, and who say they're a victim of black magic, and who take the 6-year-old child of their best friend, and take the wife of their own adopted son. And you just go down the list, and it's like, there's no one who has this collection of horrible features. So to say that this is the greatest man and the greatest prophet, you're just destroying the meaning of anything we're talking about.
Yeah. And, Jesus said a tree is known by its fruit. And you look at this guy's track record, and it's horrible. It's really, really bad. And folks, we're just touching on some of the sexual proclivities of Muhammad. Well, we can talk about theology. We can talk about his views of heaven and the Houthis, and we can talk about sex in heaven and eternal erections and so forth and so on. It just doesn't end. And again, all of these sources come to us from Islam, from the Quran, from the Hadith, from the tafsir, the commentators, and also from the Sirah. David, can we take some questions tonight? If you're okay with that?
Sure.
We'll take some questions. Before I turn over to the questions, folks, I just want to encourage you again. I'm being joined by Dr. David Wood, also known as the Dizzle, affectionately known as D Wood, the Dizzle. And I just wanted to ask if you guys like this channel, please please subscribe. I also want to mention, if you check the description box, I do have 2 online courses I'll be teaching starting March 24th. I'll be teaching a course on biblical Hebrew. It'll run for 8 consecutive Thursday evenings. It's an online course. Anyone can take it. It's basic introductory level. And so if you really want to get to know the language of the Old Testament and read it, this is the course for you. So everything's in the description box. I'm also teaching a course on archaeology of the Bible and its neighbors on April 3rd, Sunday, April 3rd. Those classes run as well for 8 consecutive Sundays, with the exception of Easter Sunday. And the classes start at 7 p.m. and end at 9:30 p.m. So all that information is in the description box. If you want more information on David Wood's ministry, all the links are there, BitChute, PayPal, and so forth. All those links are available. So please visit those links. So let me just go over to the chat box here and try to get some questions. If you do have a question, folks, put a capital Q there and then give us your question, or put the word question in caps, and we could look at that. Someone here just mentions, David, about can you debunk Rabbi Tovia Singer's lies about Christianity and Islam? He has a channel. Can you expose him?
No, I've never seen a Tovia Singer video, so someone else needs to do it, right?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
In other words, we got it's not the same thing as, but I'll get video. I mean, I'll get requests like, David, could you respond to Hinduism? It's like, why would you think that? Why would you take anything I say about Hinduism seriously? Do I come off as someone who knows Hinduism? Whereas this is a little closer, because you do have Tovia Singer talking about Christianity and Islam, but it means I'd have to familiarize myself with his videos, which would take a lot of time. The idea is that, if you notice, I don't like talking a lot about stuff that I don't know about, right? Like if I'm in a discussion with someone and I don't know as much as that person, I will usually try to be quiet and listen to what the other person is saying. So I talk a lot about Islamic stuff because that's what I deal with on a regular basis. So it's possible that he'll say something one day that I want to address, but I not on the near horizon here.
Right. Okay. Let me see if we have any other questions here or comments. All right. Take a look here. There's Truth Defenders here. David asks, Muhammad did not just have issues with multiple wives, women, and children. He was also bisexual and a possible pederast. Do you have anything on that, David, or have you covered anything on that?
There are people who might have more info on this. I mean, some of the stuff I talk about is I'm kind of joking, right? Like Muhammad would suck on the tongues of little boys, but the examples are his grandsons, right? Mm-hmm. So he's sucking on the tongues and lips of his grandsons and having them suck on his tongue. And so, when he sucked on a little boy's tongue, sometimes I'm kind of joking, although I have to say it's creepy, right? It's creepy. Is it sexual? I don't know. That's a situation where I'd give the benefit of the doubt and say, I have no idea, man. I'm not going to say that that's actually sexual, unless I'm just, really making fun of Muhammad and going down a list of horrible things that Muhammad did. But so you have that issue where I don't know what it is. Is it sexual? I don't know. It's gross. Whatever it is, it's gross. Sucking on a little kid's tongue. That's just a disgusting, very horrible practice. Do not imitate him, even though he is your pattern of conduct. You have other issues where Muhammad had a companion. I think his name was Dihya al-Kalbi.
Okay.
Al-Kalbi's the dog, right? So it's okay. Dihya the dog. And people would see Dihya leaving Muhammad's house and say, "Hey, what's Dihya doing over your house?" He's like a really attractive young man. And Muhammad would say, No, that's the angel Gabriel you saw leaving. Dihya just looks exactly like the angel Gabriel. It's like, wait, what? Right. So you do have lots of issues like that in the Muslim sources where I think you could make a case. And sometimes I might throw that out there you know, if I'm kind of messing with people, because I do that sometimes I'm messing with people, right? Sometimes I'm throwing something out there where it's not to make a serious argument, it's to give Muslims an opportunity to respond in order to lead into the topic that I actually want to discuss. So, you know, in a situation, I might say, "Oh my goodness, did you know that Muhammad sucked on the tongues of little boys?" And it's because I want Muslims to come back and say, "No, it's his grandsons," and their defenses of that is like his spit had miraculous powers and healing powers and could sustain people and stuff. So I want them to say all that. So I'm just giving them the opportunity to say that. But yeah, I think you could. He definitely had problems with women and girls and lots of perverted stuff. You can make a case with some stuff with men and boys, but you'd have to go to someone who knows a lot more if they really want to actually make a case out of it and say seriously that he was bisexual and pederast and so on.
Right. We had a question regarding the Mahdi. How does the Muslim Mahdi fit into all this regarding their prophets after Muhammad? Isn't their Mahdi the equivalent of their Messiah?
Conceptually, they're similar, but I mean, they believe Jesus is the Messiah. So they actually believe the Messiah, Jesus, is going to return, although they have no concept of what the Messiah is. But I have to say, not a good question to ask me. It's just like end times in Christianity. I've never studied. I've read the book of Revelations a bunch of times and so on, but I've never studied like actual theories of end times in Christianity or Islam. It's never been a topic that's really interested me.
Yeah, I'll just add that the Mahdi, I guess it's R. Mendieta Jr. The Mahdi is as David said, an eschatological figure who is believed to come after Jesus. So Jesus comes, breaks all the crosses, kills all the swine, basically enforces jizya on everybody because doesn't have to, because everyone's going to become a Muslim anyway. And then he'll fight the Antichrist. He'll live up till he'll live a couple of decades, and then he'll die, be buried next to Muhammad in Medina. And then the Mahdi kind of comes to wrap it all up. He's the guy who comes and ties up the loose ends at the very end. So he's not really a Messiah figure. He's seen as the guy who comes and basically sums up all of history, kind of ties everything up at the end. TD, thanks for that super chat. I really appreciate it. Okay, let's see if we have any more questions here for our guest. All right. Okay. All right. Okay, we do have a question here by Nate. If Dr. David Wood's nickname is the Dizzle, then what should be the nickname of Dr. Tony Costa? I don't know. Do you have any ideas, David?
No, Tizzle doesn't sound right. We were all hanging out one day. We all had versions of that, and then this was way back in the day. So that was back when we were working with James White and so on.
Yeah,
we're like, what do we do with James? And Jizzle didn't sound right. And then Jay Whizzle didn't sound right either. And then someone says,
what do you call my winger, Dave? You got a nickname for his followers.
Yeah, Wingalings.
Wingalings. Okay.
Yeah.
So Mike Winger's followers are Wingalings.
Yeah.
Okay. We have a question here from Armor of Truth, this dear brother Brad. Is it true that in Muslim apologetics, ridicule is stronger than truth, that the audience will side with the man who lands with more zingers?
No question, like beyond any doubt. That's the main factor. And interestingly, I learned that from Nabil way back in the day when we'd be watching a debate. We watched William Lane Craig versus Jamal Badawi. Craig crushed him, and we finished watching, and Nabil said, Badawi clearly won. I was like, what are you talking about? What are you even talking about? And in that debate, Badawi became angry and started yelling. And so I had to, figure it out with Nabil. Hey, what's going on here? And eventually figured out that when we see someone losing and then start yelling, we think, oh, you're getting desperate. Whereas Nabil was saying, no, he's getting passionate because the other man is getting away with blasphemy. So he's got a righteous anger. And so it's a sign that he's on the side of the truth, whereas William Lane Craig is so calm because he doesn't even believe what he's saying. And so back then I just thought that was Nabil, and then I found out no, it's very common in Islam. In fact, I mean, it even goes back. It's in the Muslim sources when you have a situation like Muayyisa and Huayisa, and one of them converts to Islam and then goes on a killing spree and kills someone that was a friend of the family. And his brother says, "You just killed him, friend of the family." And he says, "I'd kill you too if Muhammad ordered me to." He's like, "Wow, this is amazing. I have to convert too." And it wasn't, "I'm afraid." It's, wow, whatever can sort of, get you enraged like this, it must be true. And you find it in things like the apostate wars, when Muhammad died and a bunch of people tried to leave Islam, and Abu Bakr says, some of them weren't just saying, "Hey, I'm not a Muslim anymore." They were just saying things like, we're gonna pay our zakat however we want. We'll just give it to charity or something like that. We don't have to pay the Muslim government when we're not exactly sure that who should be in charge. And Abu Bakr said, "You're apostate too. I'm coming to kill you all if you don't do what I say." And then Umar, who's going to be the caliph next, Umar says, "What are you doing? What are you doing?" Muhammad said there's only these 3 situations where we can kill a Muslim. One is for if he leaves Islam, 2 if he commits adultery, and 3 if he murders another Muslim. You're saying you're gonna go out and kill these people for not paying their zakat, right? What's wrong with you? And so Abu Bakr's reasoning was, they're all apostates to me if they're not doing that. But Umar's response was interesting. He says, "I could tell by the heaving of his chest that he was right." It's like, wait a minute, you didn't give me any argument or evidence that you're right. I could just tell by how angry you're becoming over this that you're right. And so it's always just been built into Islam that the guy who's no, I'm right, that guy must be right. And the other guy who's calmly presenting his points, that guy doesn't have the truth on his side.
Right. So it does sound like an appeal to emotion. You're
working up the crowd.
Yeah, the fallacy of appeal to emotion, that by appealing to emotion, you want to look like you're on the side of truth, when in fact they're not. So yeah, so hope that helps, Brad. We have a question from JD. The Saudi prince has abrogated about 90% of the Hadith. So are they still relevant? Now, that'd be old news to me. I have no idea about.
I know that he was getting rid of some Hadiths and so on. I don't know the exact details, but no, the vast majority of Muslims do not get their religion from the Saudi prince, right? I mean, at most he could crack down in his area. But the Muslim scholars and those who follow them are not going to be bound by the Saudi prince.
Right. Okay. Anyway, Brad suggested I be called the Sizzle. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
doesn't fit with your name.
Okay, it doesn't really fit.
Tony Costa. Costa.
Okay. Someone made up a good point here that if you guys are interested in any refutation of Tovia Singer, check out Michael Brown. Dr. Michael Brown has done, I believe he did one debate with Tovia Singer.
Much better source.
He's a Messianic Jew, and so he understands Talmudic Judaism. So Dr. Brown, Michael Brown, I think askdrbrown.com is his website. So you may want to check with him on that. Okay, let me see if we have any other questions here. Let me see. We have a question here from Nada. How do Muslims justify their following of Muhammad and willingness to die for him in spite of all his disgusting biography?
The vast majority of Muslims don't know about most of it. And they've just been convinced that he's the greatest man ever, that it's so clear that anyone rejects it must be evil. And I'm saying that just from experience. I mean, when I started interacting with Muslims, I really thought they were all very knowledgeable and so on. And I would start talking to them and I would bring up a Quran verse or Hadith passage. They had no clue what I was talking about. So you're talking 95 to 98% of Muslims that I would talk to over the years, regular Muslims, not scholars or debaters.
Yeah.
But talking 95 to 98% of them would have no clue what I'm talking about when I start quoting the Quran and the Hadith to them.
Mm-hmm. And I think the greatest enemy to Islam, I think you pointed this out before, David, is the internet. Back in 1992 was my first debate with Shabir Ali in Toronto. And back then, everything was, you had to go to the library, photocopy portions of Bukhari and Muslim and so forth today you can do that all online. There's websites that give you the Hadith collections and so forth. So I think the internet really has done a lot of damage to Islam, because now, all that information is accessible through the internet. And so a lot of these Muslims are checking it out and saying, you know what, you're right. That's what the sources say. And David, I'm very thankful to God for you, because I know that many Muslims have come to faith through your ministry. And I've seen many of their testimonies just mentioning the fact that after listening to your channel, they've been convinced that Muhammad was indeed a false prophet. Allah is not the true God, and the Quran is not the word of God. So thank you for your ministry. I really appreciate that, brother.
And by the way, as far as the internet, I said it probably, I'd have to go back and see exactly when it was written, but probably like 2006 or something like that. I wrote, might have been 2005, but I said, I wrote an article called Islam Beheaded, the Information Superhighway and the Death of Mohammedanism. And I just gave a list of reasons that Islam was only safe because Muslim leaders and scholars have been able to keep their people insulated from basic facts and basic information about their prophet. Now, because of the internet, everyone's going to be exposed to that, and they're just going to reach a breaking point, and it's going to start collapsing.
Yeah. And a lot of Muslims are admitting that they're losing. Muslim imams are admitting they're losing a lot of Muslims. And the thing about Islam as well, David, is that the more you look into its history, the more damage control Muslims have to do. It's like with the cults, with the Mormons. The more you go back and you trace Joseph Smith's history and all the mistakes in the Book of Mormon, Mormons don't want you to look at those early documents. They don't want you to look at the early biographies and so forth. I just find it very interesting that with Islam, there's something very similar here. They don't want you to look at these sources. And so now they're ditching them, and they're saying, well, if they contradict the Quran, we can't really rely on them. So I really think you're right, David, that Islam is at a stage of implosion. It is certainly imploding in our day.
Yeah, and it's this isn't coming from us. Hijab says like 23% of young Muslims are leaving Islam. I've got a video of another Muslim scholar saying 24%. Zakir Naik says he estimates that Muslims from Muslim countries who go to a place like the United States of America, he'd estimate that 25% of them, just from going to college there, are going to leave Islam. And so you'd think, okay, well, 23, 24, 25%, that's really big, but most are still remaining Muslims. And it's like, you don't realize the problem. I mean, if you go back 10 years, it was probably like 1 or 2%. So in other words, the curve's looking like that, right? It's going up, it's going up like that. And so it's not, hey, it's right now it's at 24% or 25%. By the way, that was a few years ago that it was at 24, 25%. The issue is this is not done growing. What's it going to be like 10 years? Is it going to be 50% or 60% or something like that? And so, and what you see is, it's probably true of the community as a whole, but it's the same thing that's true of an individual Muslim. You take a Muslim who really believes in Islam and believes that Muhammad is the greatest man who ever lived, and believes the Quran is the perfect speech of Allah and so on. And you tell that Muslim, hey, did you know that Muhammad had sex with a 9-year-old girl? That's not true. That's something Islamophobes say that. Well, here, it's in your sources. Oh, huh. What do? Then, okay, let me look up some responses. Oh, he needed to have, marry her to cement his relationship with Abu Bakr, or to do this or to do that. And so they come up with justifications, and then bring up another issue. Well, look at this situation with Zainab, and it's, oh, well, there's nothing wrong with marrying a woman who later, and she was probably unhappy with her marriage. And so he's giving her a better option. So they'll rationalize that. And you start pointing out things, wait a minute, but really, throwing out adoption and then saying that he had to marry her so that men will understand that it's okay to marry the wives of their adopted sons, when that's not a situation. You start pointing this stuff out, and then, oh, well, maybe I don't know, but there's got to be a reason for it. And you just keep adding and adding and adding and adding. And it gets to a point where I'll say this, usually it has to do with them realizing that their scholars and apologists are liars, right? It's when they finally realize that, like Zakir Naik has been lying to them. But it's like this light switch moment where we defended it and we rationalized it. We defended it and rationalized it. We defended it and rationalized it. We did that for years. Same thing with Nabil. We did it for years, and all of a sudden it's just like, it's too much. It's too, I can't do it. It's too much. This can't be true.
Yeah. Yeah. And you just got to bring Occam's razor and just shave off all of those explanations. Go with the most simplest case, and that is, what does the text actually say? And if we just let the Quran speak for itself in the Hadith, it'll tell us very carefully. The commentators will tell you, Ibn Kathir will tell you that Aisha was still playing with dolls and that she had not yet reached puberty. So again, I think that I always tell my students about William of Ockham. The Occam's razor comes in handy. Get rid of all those unnecessary arguments and causes and so forth. Don't multiply causes. Go with the most simplest explanation. I think it also shows, David, that what Jesus said is true in John 8:32, that you shall know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And there's something about the truth liberating us from error and liberating us from darkness. And so it's our hope that our Muslim friends will come to know the one who is the prophet that Moses spoke of, the prophet, the priest, the king, the one that came into the world, God's son, who had a life that was extraordinary. It was a life of holiness, of purity. It was a life of sacrificial love, where he wasn't thinking of his own needs, but he set aside his own ambitions and gave his life for sinners, to redeem us and to reconcile us with God. And that's the Jesus we want our Muslim friends to get to know, not the talking head in the Quran that all he does is talks about Muhammad and just worship one God, and all he is just a talking head. We want you to know that Jesus, who is the Jesus of history, and he's the one who will set you free. And so very thankful to God for many of Muslims who've been blessed by your ministry, David, and many of them have come to faith. There's an interesting question that just came in, David. Someone asks, why did it take so long for Christians to learn about Islam?
Well, I mean, you do have Christians down through history who interacted with Islam, and you did have missionaries and so on. As far as regular Christians knowing about Islam, Christians only tend to want to learn about something when it's basically knocking at the door, right?
Yeah.
Like Christians aren't interested in learning about cults until the cult's knocking on your door, or until your son or daughter became a member of the cult. And so people weren't really interested in Islam. I mean, people became interested in Islam for two main reasons. One, you had because of immigration and refugees and so on, all of a sudden you started having over the past several decades lots of Muslims living in the West. And so now you had Muslims preaching, and you had mosques and so on. You had people, some people converting to Islam. And so it became something, wait a minute, we need to pay attention to this. But also, once we started encountering terrorist attacks like 9/11, then people wanted to know a little more about Islam. And basically now we get to a stage where, because of the internet, the entire world is much more connected, and Christians are just kind of realizing, wait a minute, this is 1.6 billion people. This is a large percentage of the population of the world who all believe in something, and it's growing. And so we need to pay attention to it.
Right. Totally agree. David, when we were talking about Aisha, Muslims have gone so far as to argue that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was very young, and Joseph was this old dude. Yep. And so they, as you rightly pointed out in your debate, they commit the tu quoque fallacy. Mm-hmm. Well, what about you? And what about these sources? Well, none of the New Testament never says anything about Mary's age or Joseph's age. They end up depending on apocryphal sources like the Proto-Evangelium of James, which again is apocryphal. It's legendary. It's not based on historical fact. And we had a related question here, Dave, and I'm sure you've heard this before, about when Muslims, what do you say in response to Muslims that claim that Isaac married Rebecca when she was a little girl?
I would just read the chapter where Abraham's servant goes and meets Rebecca to bring her back, and other than that, say chapter and verse. The entire argument is completely bogus, right?
Mhm.
Because the Bible doesn't say how old Rebecca was, right? Doesn't say how old she was.
Right.
They have to they have to make an argument, and it's a stupid argument, but it just shows how they're trying to see pedophilia wherever they can, because they're trying to justify Muhammad. And I mean, think about this. They'll say Rebecca was 3 years old and Isaac married her and had sex with her and stuff. Where are you getting that? Where are you getting that? Again, if you just read the chapter, she's clearly, I mean, at the very least in her teens. She's grown. She's out shepherding sheep on her own. And then she gives water to, like, what was it, 10 camels or something like that? That's thousands of pounds of water. Right?
3-year-old carrying,
3-year-old girl out shepherding by herself. And a guy comes along. She's like, "Hey, I'll take care of all your camel." Really, I have a 3-year-old. That's just insane and ridiculous. Unless she was the most advanced 3-year-old in the history of humanity. But they make a silly argument because there's a verse, and it says that Abraham heard news from back home, and he heard about Rebecca being born. And what Muslims do is say, "Aha, that's right, when she was born." No, that's when he heard. That's when he heard news from home. He probably heard news from home. It could be 20 or 30 years, right? I mean, just think about this. You're talking, he is a long way from home. It wasn't until some traveler would come and say, "Hey, yeah, I know your family. I know your family. Yay, let me tell you about your family," right? And so it's just ridiculous. They say, yep, as soon as Rebecca was born, that's right when Abraham heard about her. So we can calculate her age at 0 from there. And so it's just insane. So just a chapter and verse, show me how old she was. And when you don't have a case because it doesn't say, then read to her what Rebecca was actually like. And she clearly is in full possession of her faculty. So she's at least in her teens.
Absolutely. And the fact that they do that to justify Muhammad sleeping with a 9-year-old girl, it's incredible.
And note, because notice what's going on, ladies and gentlemen. Even with, like, the same thing with Mary. Now, you got multiple problems there. One, as Tony pointed out, you don't have an age. Two, I mean, who's Joseph? Joseph married. Joseph could be an axe murderer. He's not foundational to Christianity the way Muhammad is to Islam. Wouldn't affect anything, right? 3, we know that Jews at the time wouldn't marry a girl. 12 years old would be the bar. You did not start before then. You did not start before 12. So that's why you will have commentators saying, well, she could have been 12 to 14 or something like that. It could have been because they would not have married before then. Beyond that, there's a huge, even if you go with the minimum 12, there can be a big difference between 9 and 12, because those are the years of puberty, right? Those are the years of puberty. So Aisha, definitely not prepubescent. Mary definitely would have been pubescent, but doesn't seem like she was 12 at all, because in the Bible, a 12-year-old, right? What does Jesus call the little girl who's 12 years old? He says little girl. He calls her little girl, whereas Mary is blessed among women. So she's in the woman category. A 12-year-old is still in the little girl category. So the point is, you have all these issues, and we know the later sources, which start talking about Joseph being this old man and so on. We know why they started making these claims in the sources, right? The idea was people wanted to maintain the perpetual virginity of Mary. And the question was, well, why would Joseph never have sex with her? He was a super old dude. He's a super old dude. So they start writing these apocryphal stories.
Absolutely.
No one takes care. And so notice but here, anyway, here's the takeaway. It's Muslims have a prophet who had sex with a 9-year-old girl. And then we say, hey, your prophet had sex with a 9-year-old girl. That's a fact. That's according to your sources. And their response is, well, we'll lie about Mary. We'll lie about Joseph. We'll lie about Isaac. We'll lie about Rebecca. We'll lie about Moses, because they do it with Moses and female captives as well. But we'll lie about all the figures in the Bible that we claim to respect. Muslims say, we respect them. You respect them, but you'll lie about them and accuse them all of pedophilia? All to protect, like, how when we talk about Muhammad being a false prophet, look at what he does, right? He does some of the most horrible things in history. And when we point it out, you lie about true prophets and true important biblical figures. You lie about them in a desperate attempt to defend your own horrible pervert wacko prophet. And it's like, how can he make it any more? If he not only causes you to say that it's okay to have sex with a little girl, but then he causes you to go around and accuse everyone else of being a pedophile when they're not, you got some serious issues, man. This is some demonic stuff.
Big time. And it is the, as you said, David, it is the tu quoque fallacy, because they have to really argue and twist the scriptures, the Bible, to try to come to those conclusions.
Mm-hmm.
And again, when we talk, you're absolutely right. When it comes to the idea that Joseph was a much older man, this is predicated on the idea that Mary remained a virgin after the birth of Jesus, the perpetual virginity of Mary. And therefore, Joseph was more like a caretaker. He was like a guardian. He was like a husband, but a husband who was just there to take care of Mary and to take care of the home and so forth, with no interest in sexuality or consummating their marriage, which it wouldn't be a real marriage if it's not consummated. And yet we're told very clearly that they were married. They were husband and wife. But that's a topic for another show. David, maybe two more questions. Sarah Michael Ashraf asks, what would you respond to Muhammad Hijab talking about slavish morality in Christianity? As someone from an Islamic background, it does come off like that to me.
I don't even know what you're talking about. In Christianity, you're moral because you love God and you love other people, right? Jesus said those are the most important commandments. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. Love your neighbor as yourself, and love even your enemies. So what are you talking about? In Islam, you're literally just a slave to Allah. Allah says there is no one who comes to him as anything other than a slave. Everyone comes to him as just a slave. So what in the world? It reminds me of what we were just talking about. Hey, our guy's a pedophile. Let's accuse everyone else of doing exactly what our religion. Let's accuse everyone else of doing what our religion does. So in Islam, it's you'd better do the right thing because Allah has all these punishments for you, and He's gonna, get your head chopped off or get you lashes and something like that, and so you'd better obey. Notice, I want to point this. Actually, this is a bit more important than I'm talking about right now. Notice, all right, if I'm walking down the street, and I see purse full of money on the ground, a purse full of money and jewelry, and I say, all right, hey, what am I going to do with this? Well, I could do the right thing and try to find the owner and return the property, or I could take it. If I'm walking at parallel situation, if I'm walking down the street and I find a purse and I look up and there's a guy there a police officer with a club, and he says, you try to take that, I'm going to bust your head open. Well, I'm obviously going to do the right thing, but I'm not doing the right thing because it's the right thing. I'm not doing it because I've decided to do the right thing, and that in order to be a moral person, I'm going to return this person's property. I'm returning the person's property because I don't want to get my head clubbed by this police officer. Well, that's kind of all morality is in Islam. It's just, hey, to avoid these punishments, do all these things.
Yeah.
Well, you're never really doing something right just because it's right or just because it's good. In Christianity, all people are created in the image of God, and therefore all people, even people you may disagree with, even bad people, are all worthy of a certain level of respect. Doesn't mean that they don't have to be punished in certain circumstances. Doesn't mean that they don't have to be fought, like in by an army or something like that. But it means that all people are worthy of a certain level of respect, and that's why we're told in Peter to honor all people.
Right,
we honor all people, and so the basis for Christian morality is love. You obey God because you love God, and notice the reverse as well that you have between Islam and Christianity, where in Islam you do what's right in order to earn Allah's love. So one is to avoid punishment, but if it's got something to do with Allah, it's to show that you're a good slave and to earn His love. Allah says repeatedly in the Quran, Allah does not love the unbelievers. Allah does not love those who are proud. He doesn't love those who boast. He doesn't love the mischief makers. He doesn't love all these people, and He only loves you if you do what He says. And if you love Him first, then He might love you in response. Whereas in Christianity, you love God and you love other people. God loved you first. God did that first. Notice even in the Old Testament, God didn't just randomly walk up to people and give them the law. He redeemed them first. He loved them first, saved them first, and then, hey, now obey the law here. So, hijab, what? My goodness, I mean, could you pick a bigger deceiver here? Not exactly the guy the guy who's sending us messages telling us about golden showers and who's sending out these threats of rape and torture to people's wives and posting pictures of people's wives and sending messages to the apostate prophet telling him that he should kill himself. I don't know why you're getting your moral theory from this guy.
Yeah. It's a good point you made there, Dave, that Jesus says, excuse me, if you love me, then keep my commandments. And so we keep his commandments not to earn his love, but because we love him. In Islam, it's you're doing something to earn brownie points with Allah so that your good works can ultimately outweigh your bad works. And so it's a completely different worldview. We love because he first loved us. And so God's love in Christianity is unconditional, whereas in Islam, God's love is conditional. That is, he'll love you if you love him first and you follow Muhammad and so forth and so on. So Dave, there's just one more question here, and then we should probably end the night here. The question here has to do with what attracts some Westerners to Islam and makes them decide to convert?
Well, there can be people who are just attracted to something different and exotic, and they want to be different. And Christianity's, same old, same old. And insofar as that, it's the same thing with people wanting to become Buddhists and so on. It's not because, hey, I've studied Buddhism. It just sounds like something cool or something like that. But I mean, a lot of it, I would say, has to do with how basically all the institutions of influence in the West have dealt with, attacks since 9/11. If you notice what's happened ever since we had that, right? What happened at 9/11? You had 9/11, and then rightly so, we said, hey, we don't want people to think that all Muslims are coming to get them and coming to attack them, right? Because we don't want, we don't want people going out and attacking Muslims in the streets and so on. So how did people deal with that? How did politicians and journalists and educators, Hollywood, how did everyone deal with that? Well, they all came out and say, no, Islam's wonderful. It's a religion of peace. It's wonderful. Muhammad's, let's all start calling it the Holy Quran and Prophet Muhammad, and they're so wonderful. And what they would do is they would bring all of these Muslim speakers and scholars and put them on TV and give them the spotlight so that they can tell you what true Islam is, because it's not what the terrorists are doing. We want you to tell the world what true Islam is. And notice what everyone did after that. If you say Islam is actually violent or promotes terror, you're a bigot and a hate monger and an Islamophobe. Right. You're evil. If you're praising Islam and saying it's wonderful, it's the greatest thing ever, it's the Holy Quran and Prophet Muhammad, then you're a good person. You can actually psychologically condition entire populations if you're constantly bombarding them with, if you praise and exalt this religion and say it's the greatest thing ever, then you're a good person. And if you criticize anything about this religion, you're a horrible, evil, racist person. And if you just grow up on that, wait, everyone who says this religion is great is good. Everyone who says that it's horrible is evil. Well, you just grow up with a very favorable view of that religion. When the Muslim preacher comes along and says, hey, Doctrine of the Trinity, that's stupid. But Muhammad's as good as gold. You already believe Muhammad's as good as gold.
Yeah.
So it's what you've been raised on.
Exactly. So David, is there any last, anything you'd like to leave our viewers with? We covered a lot of material tonight, a lot of meat. Is there anything you like to just leave our viewers with to think about?
For you Muslims who are watching, and Tony's already said this, this isn't out of hatred. If you're following the most obvious false prophet in history, who has caused no end of problems in the world, if I hated you, I would just sit back and smile and let you go on serving him, because that is the worst thing I could possibly imagine doing to someone. We're telling you the information that your leaders are keeping from you so that you can make an informed decision and recognize that he's a false prophet. But we're giving you the information that we know you don't get, so that you can say, okay, here's everything I've been told, and here's what these people have said, but here's this other stuff, and now you're in a position to make an informed position. And it's just very strange in Islam that the Zakir Naiks and the Ahmed Didots and the scholars and apologists and da'is who lie to you and cover all this up and make things up and attack the biblical prophets, you think they're good. But then the people who come along and tell you the truth and give you the actual information, we're evil. What does your religion do to you? Where people are telling the truth are evil, and the people who are constantly lying to you, they're good. That should make you think. So when we're telling you this, it's out of love, not out of hatred. For the Christians who are watching, I would say, I know it can look like sad times in the world with everything that's going on in the world, but if you look at the bright side, if you want to reach Muslims and expose Islam, if you are sick to death of 14 centuries of, Muhammad and his teachings affecting the world like this, you should rejoice, because you are in the generation. There's never been a time before us that has had these kinds of opportunities to expose Muhammad and to reach Muslims with the gospel. You are living in the absolute best place in history. So take advantage of the time you're living in. Take advantage of us being the first generation that has open access to all their sources wherever we are in the world. Take advantage of the fact that so many Muslims have moved to the West. You don't need to hate them. They're immigrants and stuff. What's wrong with you? If you have Muslims that you go to school with and Muslims who live down your street, you should be like, wow, what an awesome opportunity to reach people. And then you also have the opportunity of now you could talk to a Muslim in Saudi Arabia right now on your computer, or from your cell phone when you're on a bus. It's just amazing opportunities. So I don't know about you, Tony. I just feel like when I look at everything that's going on, I feel like the Almighty has just said, here you go. You want to take out Islam? There you go. Don't have to kill anyone. Don't have to kill anyone. Don't have to do any of that. I'm giving you everything you need to just wreak havoc on this ideology. So that's
no, I agree. That's again, information, knowledge is power, and the truth will set you free. So folks, again, if you're a Christian, please get to know your Muslim neighbor, love them for the sake of the gospel, love them for the sake of Christ, expose Islam. They're bound by the lies that have been perpetrated through their prophet all these years. And we do have a duty to our Muslim neighbor. They're part of the Great Commission. When Jesus said, go into the world and make disciples of all nations, the Muslim communities and nations are involved in that. So love your Muslim neighbor. Tell them the truth. They need to know the real Jesus of the Bible. They need to know that what it's like to have everlasting life. And again, folks, we want to thank you for joining us tonight. Please don't forget to, in the description box, all the information to David Wood's work and ministry is there. If you want to check that out, it's all available. All the links are there. I mentioned already the 2 courses I'm teaching, 2 online courses. I'll be teaching Biblical Hebrew starting March 24th, 7 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And then April 3rd, I'm doing a series on archaeology of the Bible and its neighbors. If you're interested, the email's on the screen there. Just contact us at torontoapologetics@gmail.com. We'll get you all set up. So thank you again, everyone. David, thank you so much for giving us of your time. Would love to have you back. You're just such a great source of information and encouragement to the body of Christ. So thanks, David, for being part of our show tonight.
All right.
And everyone, thank you again. Have a good night. God bless you. And always remember, Christ is King. Jesus Christ is Lord. And he will have the victory. So take care, everybody, and God bless. Bye.